Hello again. I'm Asani Fisher, and this video is going to be about the most important paradigm shift I've ever had, both in regards to sports analysis and perhaps life overall. We're only 2 videos into the series, and I can already guarantee you it's going to be the weirdest show about sports of all time. It's tough. I'm finding this to be a very difficult project in a unique way. Never before have I felt so confident that I have something worthwhile to say, yet so unsure of my ability to articulate it in a way that will be impactful. Trying to explain your paradigm shift to someone else is a weird thing. Most times, they don't occur because of new information, but rather because of a different approach or mindset towards old information. The information itself can oftentimes sound trite or obvious. So here, you want to know the most important paradigm shift I've ever had? It was in regards to individual greatness versus the power of the collective. I used to buy into the narrative of one great individual overcoming the collective efforts of the many, whereas now I think that properly harnessing the collective efforts of the many is the optimal approach. And doing so often involves starting out with a proper understanding of the limitations of the individual. The obvious application to sports analysis being how one reacts when their own intuitions conflict with the sports betting market. That's it. That is a fairly complete and accurate description of the most important paradigm shift I've ever had. But I mentioned earlier that I'm finding this to be a difficult project, and more specifically, this right here. This is the difficult part. Everything up until here, I'm happy with. In my first video, I went back and looked at my failed first attempt at sports betting, and I read some of the feedback I was getting from other professional gamblers on the 2+2 message boards. And so far in this video, I've outlined the most important paradigm shift I've ever had, and I can tie the two together by noting that at the time of those 2+2 posts, I was just beginning to start having this paradigm shift. So in a lot of ways, that 2007 Asani Fisher was the epitome of someone who had bought into the old paradigm of individual greatness. And what I want to do now is wrap it all up by offering some great advice from current Asani that would have gotten through to old Asani, something that would have expedited that 10+ year learning process. And I got nothing. I mean, I don't know. I can put lots of words together that'll sound good. I can ramble about moral philosophy and turn this into an ethical debate. I can give you examples from my own life of where I've had this paradigm shift and argue them on a case-by-case basis. But if I'm holding myself to the standard of saying something that would have truly gotten through to me back then, I don't think I can honestly say that that would have done it. And so I've been stumped on what to say, and I went back and I again looked at some of those old 2+2 threads. This time, however, I paid attention to my responses to the feedback that I was getting. And I had to wade through a lot of trolling. I was quite a ridiculous person. But basically, my response was to tell everyone that they were being mean to me. There were quite a few different debates, and it's not worth rehashing any of them in particular. But yeah, that was the gist of it. That my feelings were hurt by the feedback that was being given to me. And now I think it's fine to dismiss some of this as Asani being a ridiculous person. I get that. But I also think there are some legitimate answers here. In particular, this is an interesting commentary on paradigm shifts and the disparity between how easy it can sound to have one and how difficult it can actually be in practice. The information wasn't getting through to me because it felt like everyone was acting like it was just so easy, and when they described it, it sounded easy, but to me it wasn't easy. And they made it sound like I just needed to turn on a switch and think a certain way, and to me it felt like I need to turn off a lot of switches first in my brain, and no one was being empathetic to that. And in a weird way, I'm right now kind of not being empathetic to that. Just by asking the question, if I could go back and give myself advice, what would I say to expedite that 10-year learning process? That question implies that my pace of learning wasn't good enough and that the process needed to be expedited, and maybe the task simply took that long. Maybe the journey was a good one and it didn't need any expediting. Maybe paradigm shifts take different amounts of time for different people, and the hurried attitude that oftentimes accompanies the advocacy of the paradigm shift can be counterproductive to the person hearing it for the first time. And so earlier, one of my ideas of what to say to my past self was to give examples from my own life of this paradigm shift and argue for their individual merit in order to prove the overall meritocracy of the paradigm shift. I'm going to amend that idea slightly. I do want to go through my own life and give examples of where I've had this paradigm shift and would like to advocate for this paradigm shift. But my advocacy will not be accompanied by arguments for the new paradigm, but rather I want to just talk about what I liked so much about the old paradigm. Because those things did matter to me. Some of the lessons I learned from them I still carry with me today. I wasn't just being an internet troll. I had legitimate reasons, some logical, some emotional, for my attachment to that old paradigm. I grew up on superheroes and pro wrestling. Seeing Batman or Hulk Hogan beat up 10 guys at once was a staple of my Saturday mornings, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. The paradigm got a little more serious when it turned to religion. I became Christian sometime in like 6th grade, and at first it was very much a social thing for me. Going from elementary school to middle school was an intimidating social change, and I didn't have a ton of friends, and I went to church youth group, and I found everyone to be friendly and welcoming and warm and nice, and when I asked them about it, they all said, it's because of this guy, Jesus. He has all the answers, and his teachings helped me a lot. To this day, I still try to implement habits of self-reflection that I learned from the model of prayer I was taught within Christianity. And the example of communion and fellowship provided by the church was quite meaningful to me on a personal level. Then in high school, I got into basketball. And anyone who played basketball in those days was influenced by Michael Jordan. He was basketball. And at least my personal interpretation of the Michael Jordan story was very much fitting into the paradigm of individual greatness. I interpreted it as these 1980s Lakers, Celtics, Pistons, these were the teams. These were great teamwork, examples of great teamwork and chemistry, and the collective adding up more than the sum of the parts. And Michael Jordan just seemed like this great individual who came along and destroyed it all. I mean, I don't know, like with the Bulls and Michael Jordan, it didn't seem to be about the journey they collectively were on. It seemed to be all about him. It seemed to be about, can Michael Jordan learn to trust his teammates? And they ended up getting Scottie Pippen, and all of a sudden he was magically able to learn to trust his teammates, and they won 3 titles. But it was all about him, kind of. He retired, came back, and his first year they didn't win the title, and then he three-peated again, and the narrative surrounding that was about how he was rusty his first year back, and that once he got the rust off, it was back to his winning ways. The narrative didn't really talk much about the team, and about how without a Horace Grant or Dennis Rodman type to control the paint, you're liable to having a Shaquille O'Neal-led Magic team defeat you. All individualistic. And as you might tell by the tone of my voice, I don't think this was as good for my character as the Christian teachings were. But I still had success with this paradigm. I took up basketball real late in high school, and my high school team was too good for me to play on, but I started grinding pretty hard at the park by myself with this individual mindset, and I was eventually able to walk onto a college team, and this kind of reinforced this mindset as a worthwhile one to me. And I know just playing on the team isn't a huge success, but for me, I was never the greatest athlete, and that, to me, it was one of the coolest life experiences for me. Anyway, moving on, in college, the 9/11 tragedy happened. This was the first time in my life that I really started thinking about politics and government leadership. My college is right outside New York City, too, so it was a scary time. And I remember being comforted by the paradigm of the great individual during this time, both in terms of our presidents being the great individual who could comfort our nation, and the idea that our nation, we were a global leader for good. It was a scary time after this tragedy, and I think comfort is the right word. I found comfort in this paradigm. Then after college, my next pursuit was poker. This was right around 2004 when the poker boom was happening. Online poker was taking off. Rounders was my favorite movie that I watched all the time. And both with Rounders and the general media coverage of poker at the time, it continued to drive home this paradigm of individual greatness. The lead character in Rounders was, he oftentimes had this mystical innate ability to soul read his opponents, and just tapping into this was the way to go about things. I know I bought into this paradigm because I remember when poker coaching became a legitimate business, and I can remember thinking to myself, oh, I don't need that. That's not that necessarily that I was better than any poker coach, but just that wasn't the intrinsic right approach to the problem, that I just needed to look within and rely upon my own intuition, and that was the way to think about it. I was wrong about all this, for sure. I eventually went broke multiple times and had to adapt, and but because the poker boom provided such a soft competition during the time, I was able to have success using this paradigm, and my success was enjoyable, even if I think the paradigm was kind of nonsense. Similarly, what Rounders did for me with poker, there was a movie called Two for the Money that did it with sports betting.
And I don't remember this movie quite as fondly. I don't think it was an all-time classic like Rounders was. Um, but I remember it being the same thing. The idea that
This guy just needs to sit back and trust his intuition, and the right picks kind of just come to him. It was a very glamorous idea of sports betting, and I was intrigued. Um, and shortly after that is when I made those posts on the 2+2 message boards. And yeah, all these things went into the person I was at that time. And I wasn't quite ready to give them up just yet. And you shouldn't be either if you have any similar beliefs. I guess that's the point of this video, to cultivate empathy for every step of the journey, including the beginning ones where you're uncertain if you even buy into the paradigm shift that's being purported. I want to tell everyone to not be afraid to move at their own pace. Don't be afraid to insist that the lessons in these videos are tailored to the nuances of your brain and your life experiences. And don't misunderstand the directions being clear for the directions being easy. This isn't easy. It's tough. It takes work. Enjoy the process. You know, there's value in the struggle. All right. I'll end this one for here. Thanks, guys. Later.